Welcome to the District of Sechelt Committee of the Whole for Wednesday, February 26, 2025. I will start with the land acknowledgement, wondering if Councillor McLaughlin would like to read it.
I think I can read it. I haven't practiced it lately, so this is a good chance. The District of Sechelt is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Sechelt Nation. We respect the histories, language, and culture of the people of the Sechelt Nation, whose presence continues to enrich this community. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I'll call this meeting to order and ask if there's a declaration of conflict with the agenda. Seeing none, ask for an adoption of the agenda. And all in favor? That's carried. And we have no delegations or proclamations today, so we'll move right to the business items. 5.1, 2025 permissive property tax exemption. I'll turn it over to Director Douglas.
Sorry, there we go. So earlier in the year, September 6, 2024, Council agreed to put together a select committee for the purpose of reviewing our permissive tax exemption policy. And we had several meetings, probably 6 or 8 meetings together. We reviewed the permissive properties that receive permissive tax exemption. We reviewed our permissive tax exemption policy, as well as other municipalities' permissive tax exemption policies. In and around the similar time that we were doing ours, the town of Gibsons also did theirs and made some amendments to their permissive tax exemption policy, which the committee wanted to have some information in this report to council to describe a little bit about that, which is included. Out of the work that the committee did, there was 4 recommendations that are listed there that they would like to move forward on. And then further in the report, there's a couple of other options that they would like to discuss with council with regards to either clauses or ideas with permissive tax exemption. So the ones that they wanted to bring to council, just hang on a second, were, so in the Gibsons analysis, they changed their permissive tax exemption standard for churches to 75% exemption. If the church kind of went above and beyond in the community, they would consider 100% exemption. And so that's one of the ones that the committee wanted to talk to council about, and that's in the report further under churches, page 5 of 14. And then adjusting our affordable housing. The affordable housing is made up of several different levels of affordability. One of them is market rate. The other 2 are subsidized rates. And the committee just wanted to bridge this with council that, should the market rate be getting exemption, or should they be not getting exemption on market rate rentals, right? Certainly, there's a need for affordable housing, no question. The town of Gibsons didn't decipher between the different levels of support that was given. So their affordable housing that are attached to nonprofits get 100% exemption, right? So those are the kind of the 2 that the committee wanted to discuss with council. So with that, the one on the churches making standard 75% exemption, and if the church goes kind of above and beyond, then they would get to 100%. So that would be the first one to discuss.
Turn it over to Councillor Toth.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start off by saying that, with churches, the footprint of the place of worship is provincially statutorily exempt. So we're talking about the land around the church and any sort of accessory functions of the property. I sort of didn't really have a strong opinion either way, which is why I was interested in this coming to committee of the whole for a greater conversation. Certainly if we're talking about a partial exemption for churches with, you get the 100%. If you do outreach, that's more work that we have to do in terms of defining what constitutes sufficient amount of outreach and, things like that. There is going to be work for staff, for council, if we wanted to do a two-part exemption for churches. Affordable housing, well, the market rental housing for societies and nonprofits. Certainly I can see the advantage for a nonprofit in that if they get that exemption, that saved money can be used towards subsidizing other units or programming or other things. I guess really for us, it comes down to the question of whether, market rental is part of the market and what constitutes a, market versus the other categories. So just my own thoughts, and excited to hear what other members of council have to say.
I am scanning the table to see if there's any comment from other councillors. Mayor Henderson?
Thank you, Chair. Can we perhaps put an envelope around this? I noticed the reference to 4.7% of the current year's total budgeted property tax requisition. So that's in round numbers, $500,000 or $600,000.
Yes, it would cover what we had in 2025, the current year.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But I mean, perhaps the more appropriate question, where does the 4.7 come from rather than?
Yeah, it was
5 or
calculated based on the amount of exemption
from
to the assessed values of property.
Okay, so in other words, keeping it at the same ratio from last year. Yeah, great.
And that can be revisited by council,
Yeah.
As either if we give more than a 1-year term, then it would be every number of years it could be revisited, or we go with 1-year terms and revisit it every year. Right now, it's an unlimited budget, if you know what I'm saying.
Indeed, but no, thank you. The 4.7 was the answer to the question.
Okay, anyone else on council with Councillor McLaughlin?
Yes, thank you through the chair. I'm thinking about when there's an assessment, there is a value for the building, and then there's a value for the land, and then there's the total, which is what we tax the total. Now, in this case, if all buildings are exempt, it seems to me we should put that number, as a given. And then if we want to give an extra 25% off, take 25% off the land portion, rather than the whole portion, to be fair, yeah.
Yeah, in our assessments, it tells us what's exempt already. We don't even get to choose. So that building assessed number is actually out of the assessment number. Yeah.
Looking around again, any comment on the recommendations that are being made? My own comment or question to finance is with the recommendations, assuming that they are passed, will there be any reduction in the permissive amount from previous year?
Yes, with the 4.7, it could create a reduction in the amount. And then we've talked about it, that all properties would share. So if it's then a 98% exemption across the board, then that's what everybody would get.
Okay, and are you looking for council at this meeting to pass these recommendations?
If you want to recommend them to council, then we would be working on the rewrite of the policy.
Thanks. I'm not seeing any more comments. Councilor McLaughlin.
Thank you, through the chair. Just to take the opportunity to explore this. Some housing projects have some non-market housing, and then they have some market housing. So how would we be taking that into account?
Yeah, the non-market housing would be 100% exempt. And that's just the non-market housing that would be considered for taxation. Sorry? Did I say it wrong? The market housing would be considered.
Sorry, I've left this bad habit, leaving it on, if I may.
Sure.
Can we clarify, can you clarify your recommendation, please, on page 6? This is where we're anticipating reducing the exemption for market rental housing. Curious, if we vote in favor of this, are we tacitly or explicitly supporting this timeline?
You can include whatever you would like in the motion, but this is just bringing it on slowly so that, it's reasonable to the nonprofits that have market housing.
I understand that. I'm sorry. Yep, please. I understand that. And in this case, there's nothing in the recommendation that say we're going to embrace a reduction. I don't think. So that's why I'm looking for the clarity. Are we in fact voting on that reduction?
Okay, so this one isn't included in the recommendations. So whatever you want to recommend, meaning you want to go with this plan with the table, then that's what we'll build the permissive tax exemption on. If you want to go directly from 0 to 100%, that would be up to the committee to recommend to council.
I guess I will put it to the rest of the council. Any questions on this scaled increasing in taxes? Not seeing anything. You know what I'm going to propose is that, is there anyone willing to pass the recommendations on page 2, and then we can deal with the table? Is it? Councilor Rowe.
I'll move the recommendations on page 2.
Is there a seconder? Councilor Toth, seconding? Second it. Councilor Inkster, do you want to speak to that, or do you want to wait until there's a vote on the recommendation?
Yeah, I just have some questions before. I vote
Certainly,
on it.
please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering what the timeline is on a change in policy implementation in terms of it. In terms of the decisions being made, we are unable to walk them back if there's any changes to the requisitions of these not-for-profits. When does it become, when is the inability for us to walk it back, i.e. we get pushback if in fact we make a major change and council gets uncomfortable doing this because it's a difficult area to walk into, to go into. And I've been there before. And if anybody remembers the history of some of the things tried to do a number of years ago, and it's a minefield. I'm asking at which because we hit a point, I remember hitting a legislative point of no return where we could not change the policy and or drop it. We were moving forward with identifying those properties designated by council through decision-making, telling the province that we would change the taxation of them. And once you get there, you're doing it. So it would be good to know that before we go down this road because it was a minefield before.
So the permissive tax exemption bylaw needs to be through council prior to October 31st. And so that's the bylaw outlining all the properties you're giving tax exemption. And we're assuming that that marries with our policy. So the policy, we would be drafting the policy now. We would have applications coming in the near future. We would be evaluating to that policy and then reports to council with bylaws. So I would say there may be a very, very short window that if there was a lot of feedback or feedback coming back that you would have to change.
Sorry, if I could just ask you to clarify, what is the minefield? Is it that there's increasing taxation on affordable units?
Just organizations that may be utilizing the non-exemption for a healthier operation. And so, yeah.
Sorry, I'm still confused.
Yeah.
What, do you mean churches? Do you mean?
Churches, anybody. If we've heard more recently from the Legion about some costs of their new development, the new building that they in a sense had to create because the sustainability of the former property wasn't there. So they had to create the new building, but they put it on a street in which we were doing some work as well. So we ended up sending some costs to them. So it's just these organizations that do a lot of this work in the community and have that sort of gravitas in the community. We just need to make sure that we're ahead of any pushback. Thanks.
I'm not sure if is there a question to staff in that, or you're just asking council to consider that?
I did ask staff about the legislative requirements, and we were told we have till the end of October. And then you asked me an additional question as to more information. So I spoke to the fact that it's, and because you asked me direct questions, I spoke to the fact that it's because you asked about minefield, and I spoke to that saying it's very difficult to say to groups that do a number of things in the community that are very tight on their profit and or if they even make profit, to make decisions that will affect them. And there could be some pushback is my concern. Thanks.
Mayor Henderson.
Thank you. So I think the only explicit thing this recommendation does is say where there's no exemption to the utility fees. Everything else is still on the table for people to apply to or apply for. The overall envelope, where the recommendation is to stay at 4.7, but we may get pushback, we may get a minefield, but we have to deal with that when the time comes. But I don't think we're being too explicit to exclude anybody, or for that matter, exclude the amount of exemption that they would get based on what I'm reading here.
Yes, I agree. There's, the number 4 is a limiting one. It's, however, all properties currently get permissive tax exemption fit within that number 4 recommendation.
Is there anyone else wanting to comment on this? We have a motion on the floor. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. Maybe I'm in the dark here, but for instance, what about the Girl Guides? Mostly land, not that many buildings as far as I can tell.
Yep, a good question on that one, because we actually just looked at the church lands on this one. We didn't look at all lands. So, yeah, that's a good question.
Councillor Toth.
Thank you. And that was where I was going with my question. I was just waiting to be recognized. Yeah, number 4 sort of speaks to any and all property. But the conversation that we did have as a committee was specifically relating to church properties, making sure that the scale of the church itself and the property that it's within sort of correlate. And so from that perspective, I guess I'd like to make an amendment to number 4 to say to limit the area of church property that can be considered. Because that was the conversation we had as a committee. So I'd like to match that. And then if we want to do something different with it later, we should do that.
All right, is there a seconder for that friendly amendment? Mayor Henderson? I'm actually call a vote on the friendly amendment. Is it clear to everyone?
Friendly. Full of process.
It's clear to everyone? Okay, all in favor of the amendment? Uh, It's out for consideration. I'm wondering if we should see, see a total list of the exemptions and what would the effect be on taxation from passing these recommendations? Would that be of value?
I'd
Mayor
be
Henderson?
happy with that if, but I think we can, personally, I'm happy to vote on this and have that come back as part of the package to the, when this comes forward as matters or in the minutes of the committee of the whole.
Anyone else? All right, I'll call a vote on the amended recommendations. Oh,
Thank you, Chair. I don't, these recommendations that are in front of us right now, anything that comes back would not have any financial implications because this is sort of tightening up to status quo. And that's the whole point. It's the reduction to exemptions for market, it's the reduction to churches that we would need to have a conversation about maybe the economic or the market impact or the taxation impact, but that's not captured in these recommendations. So, you know, the recommendations are to sort of tighten up the status quo. So there is no taxation impact to speak of this year. Thanks.
Now I will call the vote. All in favor of the amended recommendations? And that is passed unanimously. We'll move on to 5.2, budget report.
Unless anybody wants to make any other recommendations.
No, we're pushing on. No, Dr. Douglas.
Yeah, oh, so, okay, so no further recommendations from the report for the two other ones. Okay, that's great.
5.2, again, Director Douglas.
Thank you. So at the last budget meeting, we left off with what's included in my report as to a potential tax increase for operations. So we're bringing this back for further discussion with Committee of the Whole for recommendation to Council.
Thank you. Again, going to council. Does council have any comment on our status of the budget to date and the material that's being presented? Everyone seems quite happy with it then. Anyone? Mayor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy with your comment. Are we happy with the status of the budget process? I'm not prepared to support the recommendation because I've raised some questions, as council knows, about some of my concerns. Everybody in the, it seems everybody in the world is worried about costs. We've got the federal government implementing, directing staff to find reductions. We've got the province mandate letters saying costs are a primary concern for every ministry in the provincial government. Other municipal governments are doing this. I even got a headline that Hong Kong is controlling expenses planning for controlling and reducing expenses in 2025, 26. So I think tied with that is my ongoing plea perhaps that we increase the capital infrastructure amount because, even New Westminster a couple of weeks ago had a water main burst, and we're going to be facing these sort of things on an ongoing basis. So, yeah, I'm not, for myself, comfortable with saying we're ready to proceed with the budget. I really feel we need more information, we need more assessment, and we need to challenge ourselves to deliver more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, thank you. When we, after a number of months of the budget, when we speak to it, it would be good to hear from council members, individual recommendations and choices being given to council as to what would be changed. You mentioned, the mayor mentioned $2 million previously, so it would be good to hear more about that. One of the problems with recommendations in the community of a $2 million cut is that the District of Sechelt, if you look at our budget, what we are is we're a lot of bodies. We're a lot of people. That's where, when you look at the budget, we don't buy a lot of different kinds of things. So we can't just say, we're going to buy less oil next year, or we're going to buy less pig iron next year. We are made up of a number of FTEs and a small number of PTEs. So the cuts have to come from that area. And so once you start suggesting that, you go into a very uncomfortable area. And you always ask, well, do you have names? Name names, right? Because that's all we have. So I'm looking for more to just move money from our budget to the 3% is it's still a taxation to reach those figures. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Through you to the mayor, please. Your worship, I've heard you mention many times about wanting to raise, the capital to 5% or whatever, but I don't think I've ever seen you actually put a resolution out to that or to make a motion to that. So it's all fine and good to keep saying that and that, we don't support and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to get into all of that, but as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, if one of us has an idea that we want to discuss as a real possibility, then we make a motion, we have that discussion, we make a decision, then we move on. So I guess my challenge is if that's what you truly want, then make a motion to that end.
Thank you. Councillor Toth.
Thank you. I think I'm hoping it's a softball question for finance because I think they've got the answers already. But when we look at the operational deficit, for example, as listed on page 12, how much of that, the $1.8 million, for example, is an increase for our CMP costs? How much of that is an increase to pay for the debt funding for the operations center? There are some other items in there, like there's FTEs that are now whole year that were budgeted for part year, in 2024. I don't know if finance has sort of the dollar value of that lift handy. But I think it'd be interesting just to sort of surface a little bit of details of what goes into that number. Thank you.
Director Douglas.
Thank you for the question. Yep, the costs, I have some of those costs for you. The new debt for the Operations Center in the 2025 budget is $150,079, and that's a split between interest and principal. Just all staff costs, including the FTE increases from 24 to 25, was $425,000. RCMP related costs, including integrated teams, victim services, guarding, Crime Stoppers, $236,740.
Thank you. Any other comments? For myself, you know, I sort of go back to CEO Yates' question, almost at the beginning of the budget process, saying, do you want to help staff expedite this process by saying, you know, we are comfortable with a 6% increase, which would have given them a lot more guidance. And I'm just wondering, you know, my own comment on where we're at, which is about an 8.62% increase is, and taking a look at previous years, I'd certainly like to see the trend line start going down in terms of what we're taxing. And my personal comment is, I wonder if we could reduce 1%, the 8.62 down to 7.6%, which would, I think, result in we would have to find about $144,000 in savings. Is that, I'd like to ask staff to see where that's possible. Is that a reasonable request? Thank you.
I mean, that would be a reasonable request. For sure.
Thank you. Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Said my previous remarks were in reference to some information that was out in the community, as we know. But my remarks now are, you had indicated, and this is what I prefer with the ideas, is to publicly talk about it. You also mentioned Budget Committee. You know, we used to do more budget work years ago than we do now. Not necessarily the budget meetings, but some pre-budget discussions. So I like that. I do like see if we can find some savings and or find some money internally. Some are not. I mean, we talk about all the difficulties in all the ministries and the provincially and their sort of mandate. It sounds like 10% cut, which is going to be interesting. But also the feds looking at cuts. One of the things that we have that they don't have is we do have reserves. And we have reserves that have particular names on them, and or some reserves are gathered according to certain ways. And I've always gone on and on about the interest the last year. So it would be interesting to find some savings within it or some sort of transference within that in order to bring it down to a more comfortable 7 point whatever. When you recognize as a governing body that if you agree as a governing body that there's difficult times, then you have to make difficult decisions. To then sit on your reserves and say, we can't touch that, that's not necessarily a difficult decision after the recognition of a difficult time. So I would love that to be part of the discussion, to pull some out and to bring us down to more manageable piece, and then have that budget committee that you had mentioned previously to start looking at next year. I mean, the next year is an important year for some council members, as we know, and it would be good to maybe get ahead of some of those potential increases through maybe some, I'm trying to use the right word, but I'll just use the word creative. You don't always want to say creative accountancy, but what I mean, some creative ways within our governance structure in order to maybe keep next year's a little lower. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Toth.
Wow. I mean, you want to save 1%, there's $137,000 dedicated to community safety that we could cut today. But I'm okay with us using things like reserves to pay for one-time expenses or, you know, trials of things like the security patrols. But here's the thing is that after this year, if we're going to continue with the security patrols, we've already talked about, that's something that we're going to have to fund from taxation next year. If we don't, if we decide to carry it on a regular basis. I can live with 5.62% plus the 3% for capital. Like I really have no issues with it. Just to drain reserves, just to save on, you know, taxation percentages as a philosophy, I am so opposed to on so many different levels. One thing that we did do during COVID, when the whole world was falling apart at the start of March, when we were talking about adopting budgets and things like that, we revisited it and we put the 3% capital funding on hold for a year. You know, staff did come forward with some savings. We shaved it down. You know, looking back, I think we made a mistake in cutting that 3% capital funding, putting it on hold 1 year. You know, just because it's uncomfortable or unpopular doesn't mean it doesn't need to be funded. And so I will always support charging what we have to charge to provide the services. You know, Councilor Inkster, you made the comments about trying to save a little bit for next year and get it down, and it's an election year. And if any of us run again, like I would hope that we could defend the numbers as they are. I'm not interested in trying to buy votes in an election year. And I think it's a terrible suggestion to make. But like I'm happy with the numbers where we are. I can live with it. Could we tighten things up a little? Maybe. You know, do we need the $100,000 for consultant technical support? Staff tell us we do. We've sort of found a way to blend that between savings from labor and some taxation. Maybe we don't move it forward. But that's a service level decision, and that's our decision as a council to make. We can't just go forth to staff and say, you know, cut $2 million from the budget. We don't care how you do it, because that's going to impact our roads, our parks, our planning files. That's going to affect everything. And that's service level decisions that we as a council are supposed to be making, not staff. Thanks.
Councilor Inkster.
137 does not drain our reserves. If we're in that state, then we have bigger problems than worrying about reelection. I also never suggested that that I was concerned about what happens next October. I just suggested that to some, electioneering might be something that they enjoy doing over a couple of years. And so that they may be concerned about that. That was my suggestion. It's part of selling my ideas to this council is what is important to you going forward. In 2009, I brought a zero budget in the middle of the financial meltdown, zero to the community of Sechelt, because we were worried about people's mortgages being paid, much like COVID, and how they would afford to pay their bills. So we didn't increase it to them. We did our duty, but we had a lot of reserves then. So, and we also tightened up our project list. There was not a lot of projects done in 2009. It was 2010, 11, where the projects, including the sewer treatment plant expenditures to get ready for what eventually became the sewage treatment plant that was needed. So we did that later, but we did do a zero in 2009 in order to make it easier on people. So tough decisions you sometimes make. Thanks.
Yeah, just to pick up on that comment, staff have already drastically cut the capital project list for 25, from 25 million down to 5. So, you know, as for your comment, there's already a lot of cutting that's being done on the earlier drafts of the budget. But I'm looking around, Councilor McLaughlin.
Thank you, through the chair. First off, I think we are all greatly concerned about the impacts of tariffs. It's just a nightmare to think about the impacts on families and seniors and everybody in the economy and businesses. And it has been something I think a lot of us have lost some sleep over lately. I certainly have. But that doesn't mean that I want to assume that I need to make a knee-jerk reaction. It's tempting, but I'd rather be more precautionary about how we are treating staff and treating this organization than trying to be precautionary by just slashing a certain amount of money. I'm thinking in terms of capital budget, we did slash a lot. We cut down a lot of projects. And I'm thinking also, time will tell for us, I think, if the tariffs go through and costs get prohibitive and projects get too expensive and delays in delivery or whatever will happen, that will be telling for us in terms of us spending less money because it's just not going to work out. So I think we kind of have to see how it plays out a little bit. And then if we have less work to do going forward in the next few years, unfortunately, I hope that doesn't happen, but it might, then we can look at staff. We can look at the other things that help with the operation of this municipality. But I think we've done a good job in terms of retaining good staff, getting good people to work here. And if you make them really uncomfortable in their jobs, my experience is you will lose a lot of the best people you have. And because they'll just say, I'm uncomfortable, I feel my job is in jeopardy. I don't want to lose those people. So I don't want to take that approach here and now. So I think the numbers being put out in the media about the cost of the budget, I don't know where those numbers are coming from. They seem like a scare tactic. And that's unfair because people are already very scared about things. So let's just get real here and be careful and cautious and reasonable. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bell.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, just to echo both Councillor Toth and McLaughlin's comments, I agree. I think that, yes, there is a lot of talks about tariffs and our government being pulled off track of looking after what's at home. And I think there's going to be a real concern, a real challenge and a real problem as a result of that. So regardless of whether that's going to happen, we don't know. It's pushed it out another 2 months. So we cannot follow that as our story right now. Yes, it's there, but at the same time, we cannot let our municipality, our services fall apart, and we cannot take any risk with staff. I think we've got a tremendous staff here right now, and I know that they have worked very hard at this budget. We'd like to get our numbers down, but I look at this budget again and I say, there's just no way. There's always a way, but are we at so close to the bone that we will be now looking back and having to try and figure out how we're going to try and solve some of the solutions in front of us because we've cut it back so far. So I'm comfortable with this number. I'd like to put a motion forward that I will support this 8.62 as well, which I think was.
Is there a seconder to that? Sorry, if you could read your motion again, and then I'll go to.
So my motion, well, okay, so tax rate, so you wanted, I'm looking at the total number of 8.62. I'm 5.62? Okay. Councillor Toth, would you please take this?
Thank you. It's that a 5.62% property tax increase to cover 2025 general operating fund increases be approved. And the reason is we've already approved the 3% for capital.
Okay,
So if you approved
you.
8, we'd be at 11 because we've already approved the
Gotcha.
3. So
Thank you
Yeah.
for the clarification.
Is there seconder for that? Councillor Toth will second it. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to piggyback on what my colleagues were mentioning about tariffs. When we were at the foundation agreement celebration on the weekend and spent some time with MLA Neal and MP Weiler. And our MLA is sitting on a tariff committee looking at what the impacts might be for different municipalities and trying to come up with some strategies for us. So I was heartened to hear that, not that I would think they're not taking it seriously, but it's a pretty busy time at the beginning of the legislature that they are meeting and trying to have some information to come back to us with. My other comment is I just sort of wanted to talk about our biggest asset, which is really human resources. And for those of you that weren't around, I just want to make it clear that Bruce Milne's council and Darnelda Seeger's council really rebuilt this place. And I don't think that's an over-exaggeration. And, you know, that's 6 to 8 years of hard work. And so I think we have to be careful when we start talking about large numbers coming from operations, because really there's only one place those come from. And if I'm a staff member and I'm working somewhere and I think a council's going down that road, I'm sure looking on the job sites, because Lord knows they're out there. So in part, that's why I've put forward that notice of motion for next regular council meeting around setting a timeline for discussions around large discussions. But I just want us to all sort of recognize recognize where we are. This isn't the way it used to be. In a staff that was as solid, experienced, and cohesive as it is today. And I want us to be really careful before we go down a road that might alter that. And, you know, that it doesn't have to be layoffs. That is led by uncertainty. So those are my comments. I can live with 5.62 in the times that we're at. We've got a beautiful new operations center. You know, we provide a lot of things that perhaps are necessarily unfairly land on our desk, like more than our fair share of RCMP when you relate it to the province. Looking after victim services that, you know, basically cover the whole coast. So, you know, that's the community we are, and that's why we're here. And nobody loves it, but I'm happy with it that staff done the work that they need to do to get us where we are.
Thanks for that history, Councilor Rowe. That's very helpful. Anyone else, any other comment on the resolution? But Mayor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to not respond to Councillor Rowe's inference about staffing today, but I will. For now, I will reference for council two or three things. One, we're talking here about the operating fund, so discussions of reducing capital expenditures are not relevant to that discussion. I applaud that we've been able to complete a lot of projects and maybe we've deferred some, but that's a very separate discussion than our operating costs. 5.62, if I look at the sheet that was in our agenda, I believe, is the second highest increase in the last 15 years. So I'm sorry, we are, if you also look at page 12 of our agenda package, where the operating deficit as proposed based on the things that we've changed is about 2.1 million. And we're having to find funding for that. Now, I'll explain. I think the 3% should be taken out of this page because it does relate to a very separate objective, which is infrastructure renewal. So if you look at the 1.8 million at the top of page 12, and you add all of the 696 except for the 3%, that comes to about 2.1 million. That is an increase in our net spending in 1 year. We happen to be having some short-term surpluses, perhaps because interest rates were high and so on last year. We can't rely on that to continue. So we are we're not only are we proposing an increase 5.62%, but we are embedding a number of increases that I feel are not sustainable. So the last thing is, I guess I need to again explain, as I have to some of you directly, my suggestion was that we have reports back to us on what would a $2 million saving look like, not that we would implement it. And it is not our job to identify what those items would be. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's some points. I get the sense that we're circling back to Director Douglas's earlier comments that there are a lot of sort of baked in contract increases that are sort of at the essence of the problem that we're dealing with, that we really, at this point, really have no control over. So, but I want to get back to the recommendation. Is there any other comment on it? My own comment is I'm going to vote against it because I would want to see, we're in the sort of tail end of the budget process. I'd love to see if it's possible to do a 1% reduction, but I am going to call the vote. Who is in favor of the recommendation on page 11? 5, all against? Against 2. So the motion's carried. And that is the
Sorry, Chair. I'm just going to jump in since it's easier to explain. We are approving this at Committee of the Whole based on the 5.62%, but there would be nothing preventing you from still asking for that information to come back about the 1%. Like until we read bylaws and adopt bylaws, nothing is final. And I guess that's one thing that, we did sort of learn during COVID times is that we thought we were done. And then we reopened it because there was some, existential circumstances. So we could still have information come back about a 1% if you wanted.
Thank you for that, Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, Chair, I would support your motion if you introduce that. I'm supportive of 5.62. I've spoken about looking at our budget a number of times over the next year, even now to see if we can find some savings to reduce the hit on the taxpayer. But as has been argued by a number of council members, the work that was done and what that actually means, it's difficult to not support the 5.62. But I would second a motion from yourself to look at those savings once again, if possible. I doubt that, other than a couple of things that I would be in favor of, I'm not sure where that would go. So I will second that if you introduce that. And the other thing I wanted to ask, Chair, is just to be clear, because of the confusion within the community, seemingly in a budget in which we've received communications that said it was a 17% increase, and council's read that. And we've read emails, and it's not, but we've all seen those emails. But just some clarification in terms of the last vote. 5 in favor, 2 yourself, because you'd like to see 762, not because you reject the budget presented. Yeah, okay, thanks. I'm not clear where the mayor was on that. This is really important stuff to be discussing this, considering what's out there. That I wasn't sure why the mayor was against it, not that he wasn't clear, but I would love to hear some more clarity from him as to why he was against it. I know why you are. But I want clarity because I don't want people out there saying that, thank goodness Councillor Shepherd's against that budget, when in fact it was a 762 you'd like to see. So clarification at this point in the term and with what's going on is really important. Thank you.
I'm going to take that as rousing support for another motion. So I will make a motion that we ask staff to look at options to reduce the operating or the property tax by 1% to see what the implications are. Is there a seconder to that? Counselor Inkster, thank you. All in favor? All- Carried unanimously. So thank you for that. Any further comment on the budget process? Seeing none, I'll call for an adjournment of the meeting. All in favor? Carried. And is there any questions from anyone online or the multitude?